my name is Anete, and I'm here today with
Olivia Simone.
And we're students at the George Washington University who took a class on LGBTQIA Politics this semester.
So we'll be starting off with our topic of choice. So religion and LGBTQ issues tend to be at odds with one another, at least from what we have learned this semester. The backlash after LGBTQ rights wins comes often from religious conservatives. However, is the church always at odds? And most importantly, does it have to be with the fight for LGBTQ equality? We will dissect the religious arguments against LGBTQ rights, but also we will try to find how the factor of religion has worked positively in allowing to achieve or even helping advocate for LGBTQ rights.
So to start off with the negative arguments of religion that have been used against LGBTQ plus rights in the past, obviously the first thing that comes to mind is the religious freedom argument of the conservatives. So this argument's quite interesting. A political philosopher called Isaiah Berlin has developed the two concepts of liberty, splitting the types of liberty as negative, or freedom from something, and positive, freedom to do something. So religious conservatives in the US often argue that they have their right freedom to express religious beliefs, even if it influences and inflicts upon the freedom from state intervention into the private lives of the LGBTQ plus community. So in class we had this really interesting reading by Williams, a book chapter entitled From Family Values to Religious Freedom, Conservative Discourse and the Politics of Gay Rights. So if before conservatives used this argument of family values, now conservatives really abuse the religious freedom argument against gay marriage and just LGBTQ rights in general. So the most prominent example would be Kim Davis, who refused to issue a marriage license in 2015 once gay marriage was legalized to a gay couple in Kentucky, and she claimed she acted under God's authority, despite literally working under state's authority as a clerk. She was quite hostile, said that there's a responsibility for federal government towards Christians to protect their religious freedom, and she had this rhetoric of tyranny that the government is inflicting upon her freedom while protecting LGBTQ rights. And also another example is the Masterpiece Case Shop ruling. So Masterpiece Case Shop versus Colorado Civil Rights Commission happened like 2 to 3 years ago now, and a cake shop baker refused to bake a cake for a gay wedding. But when in court, they never settled on the artistic versus expressive debate to decide whether free speech clause of the First Amendment is really at work when it comes to protecting someone's religious freedom, as it was with the case of the baker. So they did not really decide where's the line between freedom of expression or freedom of religion versus what is actually discrimination. So they ruled in favor of the baker, but only because the commission did not employ religious neutrality, arguing the case. So do not worry, this does not set a precedent due to the hostility of the whole case. So, and also this religious freedom argument is not only seen in US, it actually has spread across the world. For example, in Poland, there was this case where an IKEA worker was fired by his manager for citing biblical passages in anti-gay rhetoric. But then the Polish government expressed their support for this man and actually sought a case against IKEA for firing him. Also, fun fact, Kim Davis is traveling in Eastern Europe right now to advocate this message as well.
That's very interesting. And to build off of that last example, we also have another negative. The Philadelphia Catholic services, which actually just happened recently after the 2020 U.S. election. So when Philadelphia refused to allow the Catholic foster services to continue to receive children due to their homophobic practices, the organization was enraged and took the city to court on the basis of religious freedom. The foster service has been refusing to place children in LGBT foster homes, which showed not only the disregard to actually helping the children, but also can potentially put them in danger, as 34% of foster youth identify as LGBT community, which puts them at risk as they could possibly be placed in an unaccepted household. If Catholic Social Services had won their case, it would have created a constitutional loophole that would have allowed for others to discriminate on the basis of religious freedom. It would also have weakened other anti-discriminatory protections for other religions that don't 100% agree with Christianity, such as the Jews, Mormons, and Muslims. Such an outcome would have negative impacts on the state of religion, no matter which one a person belongs to, and the LGBT community as well.
That's crazy. I feel like there's such an immense impact of like the judicial system alongside the legislative system in the US for gay rights protections. So I'm glad that this case didn't really work out.
Yeah, and speaking of the courts, we're moving on to the positive side of the religious argument, religion for LGBTQ rights. So our first example is gay marriage, which for the United States became federally legal in 2015. So this was kind of the introduction of a discourse between the church and LGBT rights, and has created a platform for it to be discussed more openly. It changed the definition, at least in my opinion, in the United States, of marriage as a religious institution to a civil union, and it's no longer defined as a union between man and woman, but anybody who is in love. The assimilationist approach was used in order to gain a positive reaction from the courts, and it appealed to the frame alignment approach, as we talked about in class, which is the warm and fuzzy feeling of relation by straight couples to gay weddings, and helps them create a connection by feeling more relatable, and this creates benefits for the gay community by creating a mainstream perspective. Furthermore, public opinion has helped move the court and dominated legislation. As more judges make one decision, other follows.
Yeah, so if we talk about other positive impacts of religion on LGBTQ rights, we can talk about the inclusion and advocacy by certain religious communities. So recently, the media was oversworn by these statements made by the Pope. There was a huge boom. Pope Francis supports civil union rights for homosexual couples. And to sprinkle in some political science, in international relations, constructivism is the understanding that international relations are historically and socially constructed rather than being inevitable human nature. So therefore, the speech acts of transnational leaders such as the Pope are of such big importance to create institutional changes. But however, after being silent for a couple of weeks, Vatican actually explained that this statement by Pope Francis was taken out of context. He was actually referring to 2010, when he was the Archbishop of Buenos Aires, and was actually opposing allowing same-sex marriage, instead advocating extending legal protections to homosexual couples under civil union laws. So we find out it's not actually purposeful advocacy, but it certainly is still very influential because it allows to shift public opinion and make religious communities more accepting and less hostile towards any legislation that protects gay marriage and gay civil union rights. So another positive aspect that we recently heard of is our coursemates shared an interesting article from the New York Times called "Hundreds of Religious Leaders Call for End to LGBTQ Conversion Therapy." Apparently there's a global interfaith commission and they that support LGBTQ rights, and they have put out this statement. I'm gonna quote: "We recognize that certain religious teachings have throughout the ages been misused to cause deep pain and offense to those who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex," the commission said in the statement, and they said that this must be changed. More than 370 international spiritual leaders from more than 35 countries have actually signed this declaration demanding a global ban on conversion therapy. One of them was Archbishop Emeritus Desmond M. Tutu from South Africa, who actually won a Nobel Peace Prize in 1984 for his fight against the apartheid in South South Africa. So US legislation that is in place and bans conversion therapy, there's actually a gap within this legislation because there's sort of like a carte blanche for religious providers to continue this very horrible practice.
Wow, that's crazy.
So this manifesto is very, very important because it makes religious community recognize their responsibility and the previous involvement in continuing this practice, and adds to changing the understanding of this practice and seeing it in more negative lights, therefore influencing the public opinion and reducing the hostility from religious people towards the LGBTQ community. And this manifesto actually includes call to end other forms of discrimination, like ending gender and sexual discrimination-based violence, as well as ending sodomy laws, which remain in place around the world even today. Data by June 2019 stated that 69 countries still have laws that criminalize homosexuality.
I'm so glad that there's finally some speaking out against this conversion therapy.
Yeah, it's a lot about taking responsibility.
Yeah, and that's really great. So to conclude, we can predict that churches will generally continue to become more open and accepting to religious LGBT members. Though of course we can expect some backlash. We continue to see growing connections of LGBT with the church. For example, we have Pete Buttigieg, the candidate for the president, who is at peace and open with his sexuality as well as his faith. In the future, an assimilationist approach can be seen as people across the world work to create peace and acceptance between religious establishment and laws with sexuality and marriage, and push to change the definitions of marriage from one between a man and a woman to a civil one between anyone who chooses.
Thank you for tuning in. Bye.
Bye.